For this lesson, we're going to be looking at how we can add and subtract rational expressions. So addition and subtraction of rational expressions is basically the same as when you're adding or subtracting fractions. First thing you need to do is find a common denominator, and then you just add the numerators. We found our common denominator, we leave the bottom, and we just add the top. So let's work through our first example by finding a common denominator. So if I look at example A, I have a common denominator of x squared. Every single term here has x squared in the denominator. So I keep my denominator and I add all of the numbers. So 3 plus 5 minus 2 is going to give me 6. And then I state my restrictions. So because I have this x squared in the denominator, x cannot equal 0. Let's try it again with example B. So in example B, we have 4x minus 1 over x plus 2 minus x plus 3 over x plus 2. So because both of these have the same denominator, we can keep the denominator and add the numerators. So we'll have 4x minus 1 minus x plus 3. So make sure that when we're subtracting, you put the expression in the numerator in brackets, just so you don't forget to distribute our negative here. So now we'll have 4x minus 1 minus x minus 3 all over x plus 2. And then we can simplify that to 3x minus 4 all over x plus 2. And then we need to make sure that we state our restrictions. So we can't have x equaling negative 2, or else the bottom would zero out. Okay, so that's how this works when we have common denominators. But if we don't have a common denominator, just like with fractions, we need to find one. So when we're looking for a common denominator, we want to find the lowest common denominator just to make our math easier and simpler. So let's practice finding some lowest common denominators. So the lowest common denominator of 2 and 8 is going to be 8. To get to 8, I can multiply 2 by 4 and 8 by 1. Then what about 3, 5, and 10? So the lowest thing that I could get them all to is 30. I could multiply 10 by 3, 5 by 6, and 3 by 10. And finally, x and 2x squared. My lowest common denominator would be 2x squared because I could multiply x by 2x and end up getting the same denominator. So for example, think of how we add fractions. So if I have 2/5 plus 1/3, I need to have the same denominator. So I would think, what's my lowest common denominator? And it would be 15. So I need to make this 5 into a 15. In order to do that, I multiply by 3. If I do that to the denominator, I need to do it to the numerator. So that also needs to be multiplied by 3. So that gives me 6 over 15. Similarly, with a third, we want to get the denominator to 15, so we're going to multiply by 5. If I do it to the denominator, I also need to do it to the numerator. So I get 5 over 15. And then I can add just like we did above. So now let's try making a common denominator. So for this example, we have 3x plus 2 over 4, x minus 4 over 8, and 2x minus 1 over 6. So our lowest common denominator here is going to be 24. So now I need to think of what I can multiply each of these by in order to get 24. So I'd have to multiply my 4, by 6. And if I multiply the top by 6, I need to multiply the bottom. Oh, sorry, the other way around. If I multiply the bottom by 6, I need to multiply the top by 6. Now, for 8 to get to 24, I'm going to multiply by 3. If I do that to the denominator, I need to do it to the numerator as well. And then for 6, to get to 24, I'm going to multiply by 4. And because I did it to the denominator, I also need to do it to the numerator. So that will give us 6, 3x plus 2, all over 24, plus 3x minus 4, all over 24, minus 4, 2x minus 1, all over 24. Now, just like above, we can keep our denominator, and then we just add and subtract our numerators. And that's all over 24. And now I can start distributing and simplifying. So it's going to distribute in these numbers here. So that gives me 18x plus 12 plus 3x minus 12 minus 8x plus 4 all over 24. So we will have 13x plus 4 all over 24. And because at no point I had an x in the denominator, there's no restrictions and I don't need to worry about that. Okay, let's try another example. So for example 3, we're going to find a common denominator here. So for this first one, our common denominator would be x squared. So this one will have to get multiplied by x. And if I do that to the denominator, I also need to do it to the numerator. So that will give us 2x over x squared plus 6 over x squared. And now I'm going to add them. We keep the denominator, and then we just add our numerators like that. And because I do have x's on the bottom, I need to think about my restrictions. So in this case, x cannot equal 0. For our next one, I'm going to find my lowest common denominator, and that would be 10a cubed. So this one I would need to multiply by 2a squared. And if I do it to the denominator, I need to do it to the numerator. For this one, we'd multiply it by 5a. So I need to multiply the top by 5a. And then for my last one, I'm just multiplying by 10. So that will give us 8a squared all over 10a cubed minus 15a all over 10a cubed plus 10 over 10a cubed. So now that all my denominators are the same, I add my numerators, and I have that all over the same denominator. And now because I have variables in my denominator, I need to state my restrictions. So in this case, a cannot equal 0. So our next one here, next example, is factoring a -1 from the denominator, and then we'll simplify and say any restrictions. So sometimes our denominators don't quite match, but there is a way we can make them match quickly. So if you notice, you have x minus 3 and 3 minus x, where they're close, but they're not the same. We can factor out a -1. So out of the second one here, I'm just going to factor out a -1 out of the denominator. There we go. So all I did is I just factored out a -1 out of the bottom. Now, what we can do is we can rewrite that as negative x minus 3. So now we're so close. We have our x minus 3's, but we have this negative. Now, if I have a positive number and I add a negative, that's the same thing as me subtracting the two of them. So I can rewrite it like this. And now I have my common denominators. So I will have 5 minus 2 all over x minus 3, which will give me 3 over x minus 3. And now for my restrictions, x cannot equal 3. And that is our final example. So there's some homework for you to try and practice, and let me know if you have any questions.